Week 9 already. Where did the time go in managers that transform? You need these tools. Now let's get out there and start transforming. But first, before we do, let's talk conflict management. To be honest, conflict is going to happen. We work to avoid it, but we know it's going to happen. So we want to use conflict as an opportunity. So, say, for example, you're around the office and if you've observed your team members' work performances and their behaviors and you're monitoring their attitudes, and now you're giving some formal feedback to them along with setting expectations for the next quarter, for the next year, defining specific goals for the remainder of the year's work. I mean, this is what you do as managers that transform. What are you really doing when you're giving that feedback? The answer is you're doing conflict management because you are communicating clearly with the team. So with conflict management, we first want to do it by trying to avoid any unnecessary conflicts, right? And how do we avoid conflict? Well, one is to set good ground rules that everyone on the team can live with. We talked about that in terms of the tool called a team charter, where they get to make input on the ground rules that everyone will live with. In addition, another tool to avoid conflict is to plan your communications, including that feedback period I just mentioned, right? Keep members informed of constraints, objectives, decisions, changes, performance related to those, right? Do good leadership management emotional quotient skills, such as active listening. And of course, the clearer you can define roles and responsibilities, the better off you're going to be, because you're going to have reduced conflict. Yet, I'll be honest, conflict is inevitable. So my point would be, even though you're going to do everything you can to minimize it, because it is disruptive, it's going to happen. So make it an opportunity, right? That is going to result in greater productivity and positive worker relationships. The reason it's inevitable is that just human beings are human beings. I would have thought in a study that the number one reason for conflict would be personality driven or personality work styles. It turns out that isn't even close to the top. Sources of conflict by general research say your schedule conflicts are the number one reason for a conflict. What about work priorities, right? This is the number two reason for conflict. What about work resources available? Do you have enough resources? Again, higher proportion of work conflicts happen because of schedules, priorities, and resources. The fourth one, the number 4 item, are technical opinions. You ever meet two technical people who didn't agree? They weren't fighting. They just had different personal, professional opinions. So technical opinions are a source of conflict. Sometimes administrative procedures can be a source of conflict, that we as management can create rules that get in the team's way and aggravate them. And costs can be a source of conflict. And then the number 7 in the long list are personal work styles as sources of conflict. But knowing those sources of conflict and the general order that they take in terms of how often they happen, schedules, priorities, resources, technical opinions, administrative procedures, costs, and then personal work styles, you can manage them appropriately. And again, we manage them by communicating effectively, setting good ground rules, clear roles and responsibilities, and good practices like active listening, right? I have this saying that I frankly borrowed the rhyme from the O.J. Simpson trial decades ago. But the rhyme is when talking about conflict, conflict is best resolved by those involved. That's my catchy saying. So resolved by those involved. So I want people to resolve their own conflict at the lowest possible level. As long as it isn't violent, as long as it doesn't disrespect each other, and as long as it doesn't break down whatever the team is working on, let people work through some things, right? You might want to ask a couple of questions, right? One, who has the authority? And what resolution would best serve the customer that we're working towards? There are always couple of exceptions to letting people resolve it at their level. Ethical reasons, legal reasons, etc. Ethical would be the disrespecting diversity, violence. That would be a third exception to handling at the lowest level. But I think it's important to make sure team members are initially responsible for resolving conflict otherwise, outside of violence, ethics, and legal issues, right? And it's really important with conflict to address it early. Now, one of the things you'll use for your homework assignment are conflict resolution techniques. And I like to emphasize 6. One is forcing. Forcing means more like directing someone to do something, direct the solution. And it's really pushing your view on others. It would be considered the worst, okay? Confronting the issue is really the best. It's win-win. It's root cause. When I say confront, I mean, let's have a talk about it. Let's get it out. Let's look at all the angles. Let's come up with courses of action. That is really solving the issue, but it's hard to do. Another third resolution technique for conflict is called collaboration or collaborating. And this is where we incorporate multiple points of view into the solution. That's okay, but it's just not the best. It's not confronting the issue or doing root cause analysis. Another way to do conflict resolution is called smoothing. A nickname for that is sometimes accommodating, smoothing or accommodating. This is going to emphasize agreement. And the problem with smoothing or accommodating is that the results are not permanent, right? It may be the right decision in the moment, but it's not really the best decision long term. Another conflict resolution technique is called withdrawal, or sometimes it's called avoidance. So it's the same thing, withdrawal or avoidance. It means retreating or postponing a conversation, right? And again, as a short-term solution, sometimes withdrawing is the right answer, but not in the long run. It's not doing root cause analysis. It's not confronting. So it's not usually the best choice, but it can be a good choice immediately. And then the last one is compromising, or sometimes it's known as reconciling, right? It brings some satisfaction to both parties. This partial resolution, again, not really the best. So that's something to note. It is part of your assignment as well to define those. Now, for the rest of the time, I'd like to just talk about conflict in a slightly different context. So one is consensus versus civilized disagreements, right? A civilized disagreement is disagreement without avoiding or smoothing over or suppressing the conflict. And so a team contract or that team charter I mentioned can be used to address civilized disagreement. Perfect. Consensus would be considered, defined more clearly, a proposal that's acceptable enough to all members that can support it, right? Nobody really opposes it, but it's not unanimous. Sometimes consensus is majority vote. There can be buy-in as a result. Not the best approach, but some terms to consider as you're looking for a way out until you can get to root cause analysis, really confronting the issue along the way. Now, there are also a little more than about civilized disagreements. And so civilized disagreements become, in this area, they become a state where we're working towards an end result where everybody is satisfied. But this is going to take a major time investment. It's going to require active participation from all groups. It's going to require communication skills, right? We have this basic communication model with a sender and a receiver, and there's a message that gets encoded by the sender and decoded by the receiver, and the receiver then has to give feedback to the sender. All of this requires that active listening again. And as I mentioned, we want to do conflict resolution to root cause analysis, right? So this would mean confronting the problem. And of course, all of that can be facilitated through discussion, right? As you're thinking about it and remaining open-minded, you are asking why? That's key to critical thinking. Why? Okay? And make sure in the process ideas are heard and understood by the team. Okay? Feel free to slow down if that isn't the case yet. Now, we also want to resolve internal team conflicts. Remember, it's important to remove masks. In the movie or the play or the book Les Miserables, right? They have the song called Masquerade, right? People wear masks. It's important to take those off. And masks then help us to identify the real problem. And then feel free as the manager to make a problem statement that everybody can agree to. Once you have a problem statement written down, we have to agree to give up the must-win attitude. We're looking for root cause analysis and win-win-win, okay? So once we have this problem statement and we have this right mental approach, we want to consider some possible solutions. I call those COAs, or courses of action. And then take those courses of action, so everybody gets some input, and evaluate them based on some weighted matrix, right? Not everything is as important as something else. Give it a weight. Give getting the work done on time a weight. Give responsibility and respect weights, right? And put them down as they're reflected in the courses of action. So you're weighting each course of action and coming up with a total number, right? And then communicate it to everybody in a way that it's going to be received. That requires your emotional quotient skills. And acknowledge and preserve the value of the relationships. Remember, we've talked about roles, responsibilities, and relationships, or RQ. Okay? So I'm going to take a pause here. I'll come back with a few problem statements and how they can be handled from a conflict management perspective. And that will wrap up the conversation for this week. So we'll come back with part 2 in a moment.